Katie Morrison stood in front of her locker at 5:27 a.m., the emergency department still quiet enough to hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The triangular flag lay folded in her palm, precise military creases, the kind that took 17 years of muscle memory to replicate. Sergeant First Class James Holloway's flag. She'd been holding it for 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days. The cloth was starting to fray at one corner where she touched it every shift before stepping onto the floor. She tucked it into her scrub pocket, left side, directly over her heart. The weight of it was nothing. 3 ounces maybe. But it anchored her. The locker door swung closed with a metallic click. Katie turned to face the mirror mounted inside, pale face, dark eyes that hadn't softened since Helmand Province, brown hair pulled back so tight it pulled at her temples. Her hands were steady as surgical lasers as she smoothed down her scrubs. A slight limp favored her left leg as she walked, shrapnel damage from a convoy ambush that had taken Holloway's life instead of hers. That was how she thought about it. Instead of hers. Holloway had been driving. The IED had been aimed at the driver. The emergency department of Seattle General was waking up by 6. Ambulances would start rolling in by 7, a steady stream until midnight. Trauma, overdoses, chest pain, the endless human catastrophe that made Katie's hands work without asking her brain for permission anymore. She moved through the unit checking crash carts. The AED was charged, green light, steady. The intubation kit had everything, 7.0 endotracheal tube, bougie stylet, laryngoscope with fresh batteries. She ran her fingers across each item like a pilot checking instruments before takeoff. Muscle memory from working trauma surgical teams under fire. 8 faces smiling in that photo in her locker. 3 of them were dead now. James Holloway. Lieutenant Marcus Chen. Corporal Diana Vasquez. Katie moved to the supply station. The force setup was clean, organized, efficient. She counted the 18-gauge needles, 42. Counted again because Mercer always seemed to be behind her when inventory didn't match his tablet numbers. 42. She made a note on the clipboard, 42 for needles, 6:03 a.m., kilometer verified. That was when she heard Dr. Mercer's voice in the hallway. Not angry yet. That would come later. He was on his phone, walking past Bay 2, his tablet wedged under one arm. No, the surgical supply order went through, he was saying. Yes, the same vendor. Why would I change vendors when the relationship is already established? A pause. He glanced toward the supply station where Katie was working. His jaw tightened. I've got to go. There's inventory happening. He ended the call and turned toward her with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, the smile of a man who'd just realized someone was paying attention to the wrong details. Dr. Mercer was tall, silver-haired, the kind of physician who wore his status like a custom suit. He'd been at Seattle General for 14 years. Katie had been here for 3 months. Morning, Katie. His tone was casual, the way a hawk sounds casual while watching a field mouse. How are we doing with the morning inventory? Supplies are accounted for, Katie said. She didn't look up from her clipboard. 42 18-gauge needles. 8 liters of normal saline. All crash cart medications current. Thorough. He said it like she'd done something wrong. That's good. Important to be thorough. But sometimes, he set his tablet on the counter between them, thorough nurses can ask questions about things that aren't really their concern. Inventory. Vendor relationships. Supply chain logistics. You understand. Katie understood perfectly. She understood that his surgical supply orders had tripled in the 3 months since she'd arrived. She understood that the vendor he kept mentioning was owned by a company registered to an address in his brother-in-law's building. She understood that asking questions in a hospital was the fastest way to disappear. I just verify stock, Katie said. She picked up her clipboard. That's all. I'm sure that's all. Mercer picked his tablet back up. Just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. As a team. You know. He didn't wait for her to respond. He walked away, and Katie felt the small victory of not trembling, not burning red, not retreating anywhere. She'd been trained to hold position when outgunned. This was just a different kind of territory. The radio crackled at 6:16 a.m. Dispatch, professional and clipped, Seattle General, inbound trauma. 34-year-old male, unconscious on scene, shrapnel injury to left torso with suspected migration toward cardiac structures. ETA for minutes. Preparing for level 1 activation. Katie felt her body shift. The deferential posture melted away like snow under heat lamp. Her shoulders squared. Her breathing slowed. This was what her hands knew. This was why she'd been placed here. She moved to Trauma Bay 4 and began the setup with the precision of someone who'd done this under fire, literally under fire, with rounds snapping past her head and screaming in her ears. The rhythm was the same now. Set the crash cart. Pull the central line kit. Prepare the defibrillator pads. 3 units of O negative, standing by. The ventilator hummed its mechanical readiness. Her voice was different now when she called orders. The nurses who'd been avoiding her in the break room would hear it change. The ones who'd gathered their lunches and left in silence when Mercer started his campaign would remember this voice as the one that had walked into gunfire and brought people home. "We're ready," she told the charge nurse. "Whatever comes through that door, we're ready." The ambulance doors burst open at 6:51 a.m. The paramedics were running, not walking. The stretcher wheel squeaked against the tile floor like a siren scream. The patient was unconscious, face pale as bone china, his left side wrapped in field dressings that were already seeping through. Katie saw him and felt something in her chest shift. He was deaf. She could tell from the hearing aids in both ears, the expensive model that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His family came through the doors behind the ambulance crew, a woman in her 60s who was signing frantically, hands moving through the air like she was trying to catch something falling. 2 younger men, mid-30s maybe, both signing in rapid fluid patterns. Deaf culture. Family communication in the visual language. Katie recognized it because she'd trained with deaf units in her previous life. She'd learned to give orders with her hands when voices couldn't carry. Master Sergeant David Chen. That was what the paramedic said. 34 years old. Found unconscious near the ferry terminal by a jogger. No identification, but his medical bracelet had his name and a contact number for the deaf services coordinator. Katie was already moving. She had Chen's shirt off before the paramedics finished their handoff report. The shrapnel wound was deep, a puncture wound about the size of a quarter on his left lateral chest wall. The edges were already starting to show signs of necrosis. The dressings were field quality, military issue. That meant the person who'd put them on knew what they were doing. Where was he found? Katie asked. Ferry terminal parking garage, the paramedic said. Why? Does it matter? It matters, Katie said. This wound is approximately 8 to 12 hours old. He's been mobile. He's been conscious at some point. This isn't a fresh injury. She pressed gently around the wound site. Her fingers found something, a foreign object under the skin about 3 centimeters below the entry point. She'd felt shrapnel before. Had shrapnel. It was still in her left hip, too close to bone to remove safely. The metal had a particular texture, a particular resistance. Get me a chest X-ray, Katie said. And an ultrasound. We need to see if there's anything migrating deeper. I'll get the attending, the charge nurse said. No, Katie said. Her voice was flat, calm, the voice of someone who'd given orders on rooftops while mortars landed. Get me imaging. Now. The charge nurse moved without questioning. Katie had always been struck by how discipline recognized itself, even across different uniforms. The charge nurse had probably been military once too. They all knew that tone. That voice wasn't a request. It was a command. Chen's family members were signing to each other in the corner of the trauma bay, their hands moving with increasing urgency. The older woman was signing something that looked like prayer. The two younger men were asking questions that no one could answer yet. Katie moved closer to Chen's ear and spoke clearly, enunciating, so if he woke he might read her lips. "You're at Seattle General Hospital. You're safe. We're going to figure out what's happening inside you, and we're going to fix it." It wasn't a promise she could keep. Not yet. Not until she knew how deep the shrapnel had migrated. Not until she knew if it had already started moving toward the cardiac structures the paramedic had mentioned. But that was the job. That was the promise you made when someone came through those doors with their life spilling onto a stretcher. You promised to figure it out. You promised to fix it. You promised to say yes when everyone else was already walking away. Dr. Patel arrived first. He looked at the X-ray films for approximately 45 seconds, then looked at Katie and said, "This is beyond our facility's scope. We're not equipped for cardiac trauma with foreign objects this deep. You'll need to transfer him to Harborview. They've got the surgical capacity." Katie felt something cold move through her chest. The shrapnel hasn't reached the cardiac structures yet. The ultrasound shows it's approximately 2 centimeters away. We can stabilize him and prepare for transfer, but if it migrates, that's Harborview's problem, Dr. Patel said. He was already walking away. Contact cardiothoracic surgery in Seattle. That's their level of care, not ours. He didn't look back. Dr. Williams came next, called by the charge nurse when Patel refused the case. He spent 90 seconds looking at the imaging, and his conclusion was the same. "Too complex for our facility," he said. "This patient needs specialized trauma surgery. We don't have the infrastructure." Dr. Harrison actually entered the trauma bay. He looked at Chen's face, looked at the wound site, looked at the family members signing in the corner, and then he looked at Katie with something like fear in his eyes. "I'm not taking this," he said. "Not with his family here signing at each other. I don't know what they're saying. I don't know what communication needs aren't being met. And if something goes wrong," he shook his head. "Liability nightmare. Get him transferred." He walked out mid-sentence. Dr. Lee declined. Dr. Foster said it was outside his expertise. Dr. Kapoor took one look at the shrapnel position on ultrasound and said, "This is a surgical case. I'm internal medicine." Dr. Reynolds didn't even enter the trauma bay, he just stood in the doorway and said, "Not my department," before leaving. 7 doctors. That was what Katie was counting now. 7. The charge nurse was on the phone with Harborview when Katie was prepping for transport. But transport took time. Transfer took coordination. And the ultrasound was showing something that made Katie's hands move faster, a very slight shift in the shrapnel position. It wasn't moving much. Maybe a millimeter. But it was moving. Toward the left anterior descending artery. Toward the structure that would kill him if it was perforated. Katie pulled up the mobility chair and began moving Chen's stretcher toward the transport bay. His family moved with him, their hands still signing, their signs becoming more urgent. The older woman was signing something repeatedly. Katie recognized it. Danger. 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 The visual language made urgency visible in ways that words couldn't. That was when Dr. Mercer appeared in the hallway, blocking the path forward. "I understand we're having trouble with this patient," he said. He wasn't looking at Chen. He was looking at Katie. "Perhaps we should wait for the Harborview team to coordinate the transfer. No need to rush. His shrapnel is migrating," Katie said. She didn't ask permission to move around him. She started moving the stretcher. "Every minute counts. Then perhaps one of our attending physicians should accompany him to Harborview," Mercer said. "Hospital protocol requires." "Protocol requires someone makes a decision," Katie said. Her voice had changed again. The deferential nurse was completely gone. "I'm transporting. Now." Mercer stepped aside, but his eyes followed her all the way down the hallway. Katie could feel the weight of it, the calculation happening behind his eyes. She'd made a mistake. She'd shown too much authority. She'd revealed that she knew more than a floor nurse should know. But Chen was still breathing. Chen was still alive. That was what mattered right now. The ambulance doors closed and Katie was alone with the patient and his family members. The older woman was signing something to her sons, who nodded and climbed into their own car in the parking lot. Katie watched them drive away toward Harborview, following the ambulance. Then she pulled out her phone and did something she hadn't done in 3 months. She sent a coded message to the number she'd memorized. One word: activation. And that was when everything changed. Master Sergeant David Chen arrived at Seattle General with his wife signing frantically at his side, her hands moving in urgent arcs that cut through the emergency department chaos like they were trying to reshape the air itself. His brother stood 3 steps behind in Marine dress uniform, the creases so sharp they could have drawn blood. The intake nurse had flagged the chart read, shrapnel migration, trajectory unknown, cardiac proximity critical. 16 years in trauma surgery had taught Katie Morrison that some cases announce themselves in the fluorescent lights like a countdown timer nobody wants to hear. Dr. Patel reached Chen's bay first, reviewed the imaging on the wall-mounted screen for exactly 47 seconds, then turned to Katie with the expression of someone who had already written the refusal memo in his head. Liability concerns, he said, loud enough for Chen's family to hear. Deaf patient consent complications. Communication barriers during surgery. The institutional risk is unmanageable. He didn't wait for a response. He walked to the next patient, pulling his tablet toward him like a shield. Dr. Williams entered at 3:14 p.m., studied the scans for 90 seconds, and shook his head with the certainty of a man who had already decided before he arrived. Too complex for our facility, he said, not bothering to lower his voice. This needs a level 1 trauma center with cardiothoracic on standby. Seattle Grace downtown. That's where this patient goes. He left without assigning anyone to make the call. The transfer window was closing. Katie watched the monitors track Chen's heart rate, 94. 97, 101. Each beat was information. Pain was data, and this data screamed urgency. Dr. Harrison walked into the consultation bay with the measured pace of someone attending a funeral, reviewed the digital reconstruction of the shrapnel's position relative to Chen's left anterior descending artery, and walked directly out without speaking. His silence was more damning than any diagnosis. Katie had worked with Harrison for 8 months. She had never seen him move that fast in either direction. The message was clear, untouchable. Radioactive. Somebody else's responsibility. Doctors Lee, Foster, Kapoor, and Reynolds cycled through like a rotation shift. Lee cited equipment constraints, the cath lab was booked until tomorrow. Foster hesitated, actually looked at Katie, then said, I can't take this on. Risk assessment alone would take me 6 hours. Kapoor reviewed the films and shook his head, scheduling conflicts, no surgical team availability. Reynolds, the youngest, actually made eye contact with Chen's brother before backing away. I'm not qualified for this, he said quietly, which was honest at least, which was something. 7 doctors. 7 refusals that moved through the bay like dominoes in reverse, each knockdown making the next one easier. Katie's jaw tightened so small that only someone trained to read micro-expressions would have noticed. She didn't allow her hands to shake. She didn't allow her breathing to change. The folded flag in her scrub pocket felt heavier, as though it was actively pressing down on her sternum. Dr. Mercer found her in the break room at 4:07 p.m., sitting alone with Chen's chart and a cooling cup of coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and institutional apathy. He entered with 3 residents trailing behind him like remoras following a shark. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with their characteristic hum of electrical waste, that constant white noise that made everything sound equally urgent and equally insignificant. There sits Nurse Hero, Mercer announced, his voice pitched for maximum audience. The residents turned to look. One of them, a surgical intern with the careful posture of someone still learning to take up space, actually laughed. Thinking she can do what 7 actual doctors won't touch. Tell me, do they teach delusions of grandeur in nursing school, or is that a special talent you picked up on your own? Katie's hand stayed flat on the table. Her eyes tracked his face with the cold precision of a targeting laser. She didn't respond. She didn't defend herself. She didn't retreat. She simply waited, her presence like a wall of granite with nothing to prove and nowhere to be other than right here, holding his gaze until it became uncomfortable for him. "What's the matter, Katie?" he continued, reading her silence as fear instead of what it actually was, calculation. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you too busy planning which doctor you'll try to boss around next?" He turned to the residents with the confidence of a man who had never met an audience that didn't confirm his superiority. This is what happens when you promote people beyond their competence. They start thinking they're surgeons. Katie stood slowly. Her chair didn't scrape, she'd pushed it back with the kind of precision that suggested military bearing, which it did. She walked past Mercer without breaking eye contact, and as she passed his shoulder, her voice came out low and even as a scalpel cutting through silk. "Strange how your supply orders tripled the month before I arrived, Doctor." She didn't wait for his response. The silence that followed stretched across the break room like a living thing, thick enough to hear the refrigerator's compressor cycling in the corner, the soft buzz of the microwave in standby mode. Mercer's face underwent a rapid cycling through colors, pale, then red, then a kind of mottled white that suggested blood pressure spikes happening in real time. One of the residents actually took a step backward. That afternoon, Katie found the write-up posted on the public unit board in handwriting that belonged to Mercer, unauthorized procedure preparation, N. Morrison. Under review. Standards of practice violation. CHR. Public humiliation was a tool. Katie had studied it in officer training under a different name, organizational discipline through social reinforcement. It worked because most people cared what others thought. It worked because most people had something to lose beyond their current job. But Mercer didn't know what he was actually looking at, and that made him dangerous in a way he didn't understand yet. At 6:43 p.m., Katie entered the staff lounge where nurses were gathering their dinners from the refrigerator. Martinez, Chen, no relation to the patient, Yoshida, and Flores, all veterans of the evening shift. They had worked with Katie for months. They had watched her teach a new grad how to place a central line. They had seen her stay an extra 4 hours to cover a staffing gap during pneumonia season. When she walked through the door, they stood as though connected by a single string pulled from above, picked up their containers and lunch bags, and walked past her in silence. Not angry silence. Something quieter and more effective, the silence of social exile. The silence of people choosing sides and finding her on the wrong one, at least for now, at least until the hospital decided which narrative they believed. Katie sat at the break room table alone and opened Chen's chart. She didn't allow herself to process what had just happened. Processing was a luxury that came after the emergency ended. Right now, an unconscious Master Sergeant survival window was closing, and he had no one. That afternoon, a combat medic named Graves had been visiting his buddy Marcus in Bay 5, recovering from a shoulder reconstruction. Marcus played linebacker for the Pacific Lutheran Lutes before a Humvee rolled in Kandahar province, and now he played video games from his hospital bed and talked about civilian life like it was a foreign language he was trying to learn. Graves stood in the hallway in his service uniform, dress blues with a rack of ribbons including a Bronze Star and 2 Navy Commendation Medals, when he heard the code call for Chen's room. He watched through the curtain gap as Katie moved in the pre-op bay with a rhythm that belonged to a different kind of training. Her hands didn't hesitate. Her feet didn't shuffle. When she positioned the cardiac ultrasound probe, she angled it at exactly the degree and depth that would show the anterior pericardial space with minimal scanning time. When she reached for equipment, she knew where it would be before she looked. Graves had spent 6 years as a trauma corpsman with 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, Dark Horse Company, working with battalion aid stations and forward surgical teams in Helmand Province. He had watched trained medical personnel move under fire. He had watched them make decisions with incomplete information and live with the consequences. He had watched them triage casualties based on math and mercy combined in ratios that nobody taught in textbooks. He watched Katie Morrison work, and something in his nervous system recognized something in hers. When she performed a preliminary needle decompression assessment, her fingers finding the exact second intercostal space, midclavicular line, the way it was done in forward surgical teams where you had 3 minutes instead of 3 hours, Graves felt the recognition move through him like muscle memory. He stepped closer to the curtain edge, watched her hands move with military tactical precision mixed with medical efficiency, and something clicked into place. He whispered it quietly, respectful but certain, "That's a Bagram technique. That's forward surgical protocol. You serve." Katie's hands froze for half a second. The world contracted into that pause, the fluorescent lights, the monitor beeping, the sound of Chen's wife signing in the background, all of it compressed into a single moment where a stranger had just identified something she had spent 18 months hiding beneath layers of civilian competence and institutional deference. She resumed her assessment without meeting his eyes. "Just studied a lot," she said, her voice level, her hands moving again. "Read some case reports on trauma techniques. Interesting stuff." But Graves had seen the freeze. He had seen what happened in that half-second before her voice came back online. He knew what recognition looked like from the inside because he had learned to recognize it from the outside. He didn't push. Combat veterans understood compartmentalization. He simply nodded and stepped back. Dr. Mercer watched from the observation window, phone already in his hand, scrolling through a contact list populated by hospital board members, administrative allies, and the kind of institutional connections that made personnel problems disappear into official channels. Dr. Foster arrived at pre-op with his jaw clenched and a surgical schedule that didn't include unscheduled traumas. Katie had already prepped Chen's chest, the shrapnel visible on imaging like shattered glass suspended an inch from his cardiac silhouette. Foster glanced at the films, then at Katie, then back at the films. "You're certain about the trajectory?" His voice carried the weight of a man calculating risk at 3 in the morning. Katie nodded once. "Second intercostal space, midclavicular line. The fragments migrated point down. Gravity's doing the work. We remove it, we buy him time." Foster exhaled slowly. "Your certifications in nursing, Morrison. Not surgery." Katie met his eyes. "My hands have held worse than this. Trust them or don't. But decide now." The words came out flat, stripped of apology or deference. Something in her tone, something that sounded less like a plea and more like a briefing, made Foster reach for his surgical cap. They moved into the OR at 03 for 7 hours. The room hummed with its own language. Ventilator rhythm steady at 16 breaths per minute. The heart monitor beeped its mechanical pulse. Katie stood at Chen's left side, her gloved hands positioned over the instrument tray, and when Foster made the incision, she was already moving, handing him the retractors before he asked, anticipating the next instrument like they'd rehearsed this 100 times. Muscle memory took over. Her fingers found the needle decompression kit without looking. Foster worked with the precision of a man who'd done this in field hospitals and operating theaters. Katie managed Chen's vitals like she was conducting an orchestra, every number tracked, every shift in oxygen saturation noted in real time. O2 sat 97. Blood pressure holding at 108/62. Heart rate steady at 84. She called out the rhythm in measured cadence. Stable. Holding. When Foster finally isolated the shrapnel fragment, a piece of IED casing no larger than a thumbnail, brass-colored and deadly, Katie watched his hands move with the same steadiness as her own. They'd never spoken before this procedure. They'd never trained together. But in that operating theater, with a deaf Special Forces soldier's chest open between them, they moved as one unit. The fragment came free. No bleeding. No complications. Just precision. Just competence. Just the kind of work that gets done without fanfare, without recognition, in the small hours when the hospital slept and only the machines knew what was possible. Recovery was textbook. Chen's vitals climbed through the post-op window, O2 saturation rising from 92 to 98, blood pressure stabilizing at 115/70, the cardiac rhythm holding clean on the monitor. Katie sat at his bedside for 2 hours, charting every interval, every breath, documenting the procedure with the meticulous precision of someone who understood that paper trails were as important as pulse rates. Foster had already disappeared into the surgeon's lounge by the time she finished, but not before he'd gripped her shoulder once, no words, just a nod that meant something. That meant everything. She didn't need his gratitude. She needed his silence. But that wasn't the only calculation happening in Seattle General at 05 for 7 hours. Dr. Mercer stood in his office on the 3rd floor, phone already in his hand, scrolling through a contact list populated by hospital board members, administrative allies, and the kind of institutional connections that made personnel problems disappear into official channels. He'd been watching the monitors in the OR for the last 43 minutes. He'd seen Katie hand instruments before Foster asked for them. He'd watched her manage Chen's vitals without a single wasted motion. He'd noticed, with the clarity of a man whose power depended on being the only competent person in the room, that she knew exactly what she was doing. That was the problem. Mercer's arrangement with Trimark Medical Supply had been running beautifully for 18 months, surgical orders inflated by 30%, kickback payments deposited to a shell account in the Cayman Islands, everybody happy except the hospital's bottom line and the patients waiting for equipment that cost 40% more than market rate. Then Katie Morrison arrived, and suddenly procurement was questioning vendor selection. Suddenly inventory was being audited. Suddenly Dr. Mercer's passive income stream was in danger of exposure. He found the hospital board president's number and called at 0552 hours, knowing she'd be on the tennis courts at Savannah Country Club by 0630. Knowing she liked her coffee hot and her mornings scheduled. Knowing interruption felt like an emergency to people who lived scheduled lives. The call connected on the 2nd ring. "Margaret, it's David Mercer. We have a problem at the hospital." He kept his voice low, conspiratorial. Like a man sharing sensitive information with someone who needed to know. "One of our nurses, Morrison, she's operating outside her scope. Taking charge of surgical decisions. Putting our liability exposure through the roof." Margaret protested that she was between sets. Mercer pushed through. "I'm calling because you need to know this before the legal department gets involved. She's a danger. To our patients. To our institution." He let that hang for 3 seconds. The weight of institutional danger always worked better than personal complaint. "I'd recommend an immediate credential review. Just to be safe." By the time Margaret hung up, Mercer had already moved to his next call. He pulled Katie's employment file, the one she'd submitted during her hiring process, and dialed the main number for her previous employer, listed as Mercy General in Phoenix. The call routed to an automated directory. When he finally reached the nursing department, he asked for verification of Katie Morrison's employment dates and job performance. The line went quiet. Then a click. Then a voicemail that said simply, "Verification unavailable. Leave your name and number." Mercer listened to that message 3 times. Verification unavailable. Not "she doesn't work here anymore." Not "we have no record." Just unavailable. The kind of response you got from numbers that didn't belong to hospitals. The kind of response that meant something else entirely. He made a note, "credentials potentially falsified." Another angle of attack. Then he called Sandra Oakes, the external HR investigator he kept on retainer for situations that required outside credibility. Sandra specialized in credential reviews. Rigorous ones. The kind that found anomalies. The kind that built paper trails leading to termination. "Sandra, I need a full employment verification and background review. One of our staff. Name's Katie Morrison. Nursing credentials, references, the whole file. By tomorrow if possible." Sandra quoted her rate. Mercer approved it without negotiating. Speed mattered more than cost. He hung up and leaned back in his chair, the morning light just starting to break through his office windows. Katie Morrison had made a critical error. She'd been competent. She'd been visible. She'd been a threat. And Dr. David Mercer didn't tolerate threats. Katie finished charting at 0743 hours. The recovery unit was quiet, just the soft percussion of monitors and ventilators, the occasional beep of an for completing a cycle. She'd already checked on Chen 3 times since they'd closed his chest. His vitals remained perfect. His wound was clean. His breathing steady. The kind of outcome that came from precision, from understanding the human body as a system of pressures and flows and timing. She was updating his medication log when she felt him before she heard him. Mercer. His presence preceded him like ozone after a defibrillator, that sharp, charged feeling of something about to discharge. My office. Now. He didn't wait for her to acknowledge him. Just turned and walked away, assuming compliance. Katie set down her pen and followed. Her jaw was tight, but that was the only visible sign. Everything else was locked down. Controlled. She'd been through worse interrogations in darker rooms. She'd survived far more than an angry administrator. Mercer's office smelled like expensive cologne and something metallic, probably the sheen of money, though money didn't actually smell. He closed the door and turned to face her, his expression arranged into something between disappointment and authority. An external investigator will be reviewing your credentials starting tomorrow morning. Full background check. Employment history. Everything. He paused, watching her face for a reaction that didn't come. Katie just stood there, her hands at her sides, her eyes level with his. He kept going, like her composure annoyed him. Ms. Oakes is very thorough. Whatever gaps exist in your file, she'll find them. Whatever discrepancies, whatever inconsistencies, she will locate them. And when she does, Morrison, this hospital will have grounds for immediate termination. Do you understand? Katie didn't flinch. Didn't blink. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. Pure, military-grade restraint. She'd operated in forward operating bases under fire. She'd made triage decisions that separated who lived from who died. She'd carried teammates out of killing zones at night with nothing but a compass and a radio frequency. A hospital administrator with a vendetta wasn't even the worst thing she'd faced before breakfast. Will that be all, Doctor? Her voice came out even. Professional. The voice of a subordinate accepting information. Not the voice of someone about to become unemployed. Mercer's expression shifted, just slightly, toward frustration. He'd expected defensiveness. Panic. Desperate explanations. Instead, he got composure. You're finished here, Morrison. By tomorrow night, you won't have a nursing license to stand on. I'd suggest you start thinking about your next career. Katie turned and left without responding. She walked back to recovery, back to Chen's bedside, back to the machines that knew her better than any human being in the hospital ever would. The folded flag was still in her locker, the only piece of her real life that she carried into this one. She could feel it there, even 3 floors away. Like a compass pointing home. But home was complicated now. Because blowing her cover meant losing Chen. It meant exposing that the reason she was here, the reason she'd been placed in this hospital, was because Master Sergeant David Chen wasn't just a patient. He was an intelligence asset. His contacts in Helmand Province made him valuable to the people who ran operations she wasn't supposed to acknowledge. The people who owned her. She sat in her car in the parking garage at 1847 hours, hand on her phone, staring at her handler's number. One touch. One sentence, covers blown. Extracting. And everything changes. The entire protection detail collapses. Chen becomes exposed. And she goes dark, disappears into the machinery of classified operations that eats people and spits out ghosts. She could do it. She'd been trained for it. She'd done it before. She didn't touch the phone. Instead, she drove home in silence, the folded flag on the passenger seat, and thought about what it meant to choose between loyalty to the mission and loyalty to the man you'd just saved. The rain started somewhere around Falls Boulevard, hard and sudden, the kind of downpour that sounds like applause against windshield glass. She drove through it without turning on the wipers, just moving forward through the water like it didn't dare touch her. The pages were still wet when the code came through at 2:04 a.m. Katie was home, 4 miles from Seattle General, staring at the ceiling of an apartment she'd rented under a name that wasn't hers. The phone, the real phone, not the one she carried openly, buzzed against her ribs. Code blue. Bay 4. Chen. She was in her car before her mind caught up to her body. Civilian clothes. No badge. No credentials visible. Just a woman driving through rain so heavy the streetlights looked like they were drowning in it. The hospital appeared through the downpour like a ship emerging from fog, all lit windows and urgent angles. She parked in the back lot, didn't bother locking the door. The night security guard didn't glance at her. Katie moved like she belonged there, which was the deadliest thing she could do, absolute certainty disguised as routine. The stairwell echoed with the sound of her wet sneakers on tile. 1 flight. 2. The access door to the 4th floor opened before she touched it. The hallway was controlled chaos. A resident Katie had never seen stood frozen beside a gurney. Chen was on it, his chest heaving wrong, asymmetrical, one side rising while the other collapsed inward. His lips had a blue tint that meant minutes, not hours. The monitors screamed. O2 sat at 64. Falling. The on-call attending was in the physician's lounge. Nobody told her that, she just knew. The kind of knowing that came from 847 hours of covert hospital rotation, learning which doctors abandoned their patients at 2 a.m. and which ones didn't. This one did. Katie grabbed a sterile needle from the crash cart. 14-gauge angiocath. Her hands moved through the motions like muscle memory, except it wasn't memory, it was muscle certainty. She didn't ask permission. She didn't announce herself. She prepped the site at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, swabbed it with betadine in a surgical spiral, felt the anatomy beneath her fingertips and found the exact space where needle belonged. The resident stammered something. Katie didn't hear it. The needle went in. There was a sound, the hiss of air escaping, the sound of a pneumothorax collapsing under controlled pressure. The same sound she'd heard in a medevac over Helmand Province 6 years ago, same needle, same move, different soldier. Chen's chest buckled inward slightly, the tension releasing. His lung re-inflated. O2 sat climbed, 68. 72, 78. 84, the monitors found rhythm again. 40 seconds. That was all it took. The resident's voice was shaking. Thank you. Thank you, I didn't know, the resident before me missed it, I should have caught it, I was checking the... His words collapsed into gratitude and self-recrimination, the way they always did when someone's mistake nearly killed a patient and a stranger fixed it. Katie turned to walk back to the stairwell. That was when she saw him. Dr. Mercer stood at the end of the hallway in a bathrobe thrown over scrubs, his hair mussed from sleep, his face the color of old concrete. Behind him, Hospital Administrator Rebecca Oakes held a tablet against her chest like a shield. Mercer's eyes moved from Chen's improved monitors to Katie's face, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked like calculation accelerating into panic. You performed that procedure without authorization, he said. His voice was measured, but his hands were fists. You are not credentialed in this hospital. You accessed the crash cart without permission. You performed an emergency intervention without attending oversight. Katie didn't respond. She started walking toward them, then past them, toward the stairwell. This is exactly what I warned the board about, Mercer said to Oakes, his voice rising now, the controlled tone fracturing. Rogue actors. People who think they know better. Gross procedural violation. She needs to be terminated immediately. Katie descended the stairs without looking back. By the time she reached her car, her phone, the work phone, the one that mattered less, was already ringing. HR. They wanted her at 8 a.m. Mandatory. She didn't sleep. She sat in her apartment with the lights off, watching rain streak the windows, listening to the sound of the city breathing around her. The folded flag from her locker sat on the table in front of her. She'd brought it home 3 days ago, unable to keep it separate from her anymore. Her teammate. Her soldier. Davis. Killed outside Jalalabad when a convoy got ambushed. The flag had been folded by hand steadier than hers, presented to a family she'd never meet, and she'd recovered a piece of it. Just a corner. Just something that had touched someone who mattered. At 7:36 a.m., she dressed in civilian clothes again. No scrubs. No badge. No uniform of any kind. At 8:15, she sat across from Administrator Oakes in a conference room while Dr. Mercer stood by the window, arms crossed, wearing the kind of smile that belongs on a predator. Your previous employers, Oakes said, reading from her tablet, seemed to be difficult to reach. The nursing positions listed in your application, 3 separate hospitals in 3 states, all reference numbers that appear to be inactive. Katie said nothing. When we attempted to verify your credentials with your references, we reached a voicemail system. A government voicemail system. Defense Intelligence Agency, to be specific. Oakes paused. She was watching for a reaction, the way administrators did when they thought they'd caught someone. Your references don't exist, Ms. Morrison. Your employment history doesn't check out. Mercer spoke from the window, his voice like ice forming. She's a fraud. Probably running some kind of con, getting access to patients, maybe stealing narcotics. The procedure she performed last night was assault. She touched a patient without authorization. She accessed controlled equipment without credential verification. Katie could have corrected him. She could have shown the Pentagon credentials hidden under her floorboards at home. She could have made one phone call and watched this room fill with federal agents and lawyers and men in suits who would obliterate Dr. Mercer with bureaucratic precision. But she didn't. Because saying those things would compromise Chen. Would end the protection detail. Would blow the entire operation wide open and scatter the assets they positioned for 18 months. So she signed the termination paperwork instead. Her hand was steady when she wrote her name, Katie Morrison, not her operational name, not her real name, just the name they'd decided to bury. The pen barely trembled. At 8:22 a.m., she walked out of Seattle General with a cardboard box containing a cracked mug someone had given her on her first shift, a succulent plant that had somehow survived despite her never watering it, and a photograph from Helmand Province. 8 soldiers in that photo. All of them smiling. 3 of them dead. The 4th was sitting in a hospital room upstairs, still alive, still protected, for now. The rain was still falling. It had never stopped, just kept coming down like the sky was trying to drown everything below it. She stood at the bus stop on Falls Boulevard, clutching the box to her chest, feeling the weight of it like it mattered more than it should. A security camera watched her from the corner of a building. She didn't acknowledge it. Her phone buzzed. The real phone. The classified phone. She almost answered it. Almost broke protocol right there at the bus stop and called her handler and told him the operation was blown and the asset was exposed and she was burned. Almost stepped into that next phase, the one where she stopped being a nurse and started being something else again. Then headlights cut through the rain. A car pulled up to the curb. Through the wet windshield, she saw a face in the driver's seat. Young. Familiar. Impossible. The window rolled down. Her son's voice, 16 years old and solid as concrete, said, "Mom, get in the car." She couldn't breathe. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to know where she was. He wasn't. "I know everything," he said. "We need to go. They're waiting for us at the hospital." Katie Morrison stood at the bus stop in the rain, holding a box of nothing, about to step into a car driven by her son, about to walk into a moment she couldn't have predicted and couldn't stop. The box got heavier. The rain fell harder. and the city around her shifted, waiting for what would come next. Headlights cut through the rain like searchlights. Katie watched them approach, watched the car slow, watched her son step out holding a shadow box, polished mahogany with a glass front, the kind used for displaying medals. The rain hammered his shoulders. He didn't flinch. "Mom," he said, walking toward her, his voice steady in a way that made her chest tighten. "They fired you for saving someone. They need to see these." He didn't wait for her response. He walked past her toward the hospital entrance, the shadow box cradled like he was carrying something sacred. Katie followed, her cardboard box of belongings suddenly feeling like nothing, a cardboard nothing compared to what her son was about to unveil. The hospital lobby fell quiet as they entered. Water dripped from their clothes onto the tile. The night shift staff looked up from their stations. Then Mercer appeared, still in his white coat, still wearing his title-like armor. Chen's family emerged from the waiting area, his wife, his brother in marine dress blues, his mother gripping a tissue. The external board investigator stood near the intake desk, tablet in hand, ready to document another shift change. They didn't know what was coming. Katie's son walked to the center of the lobby, directly under the fluorescent lights, and opened the shadow box. The medals caught the light like captured stars. Bronze. Silver. Ribbon colors that meant things only certain people understood. Chen's brother stepped forward. He was a gunnery sergeant, shoulders broad as a doorway, and when he saw the medals his jaw went tight. He began to read, his voice a drill sergeant's precision cutting through the lobby noise. The Bronze Star with Valor, awarded to Captain Katie Morrison for extraordinary heroism in combat operations, Helmand Province, August 2012. Mercer laughed. Actually laughed. His hand came up in a dismissive gesture. "This is absurd, she's a nurse, not a..." The doors opened. The two-star general entered in dress uniform, decorations arranged like a career biography across his chest. He was tall in the way that comes from command, not height. He walked directly to the shadow box, looked at the medals for exactly 3 seconds, then saluted them. The gesture was so formal, so complete, that every person in the lobby straightened their spine. "Captain Katie Morrison," the general said, his voice like a tank idling in a garage, low, powerful, ready to move. "Ran trauma surgical teams across Helmand Province. 214 lives saved under fire. Direct combat casualty care in forward operating bases Shank, Bagram, and Sanjin Valley. You're the reason those Marines came home." He turned to the board investigator and placed a folder on her tablet. Pentagon Operational Code Name, Nightingale 6. Captain Morrison was conducting classified protection detail on Master Sergeant David Chen, a Special Forces intelligence asset. Her presence here was authorized at the highest levels of JSOC Task Force Command. Katie felt the moment before Chen signed it. She saw his hands move in her peripheral vision, watched him use the Marine's attention to communicate. "Actual," he signed, the finger spelling precise. "You were Guardian Actual. I never knew. All this time, I never knew." Mercer's face had gone the color of old bone. The investigator was already swiping through documents on her tablet, her expression shifting from confusion to something colder. "Dr. Mercer, these supply requisitions show surgical equipment marked delivered but never logged into inventory. Double-entry vendor invoices. Duplicate routing numbers on procurement forms dating back 18 months. Mercer tried to move toward the exit. 2 hospital security officers appeared like they'd been waiting in the walls. "Your vendor contact at MedSupply Direct provided full cooperation," the investigator continued, her voice clipped and professional. "Emails, payment schedules, recorded calls discussing inflation tactics. We have documentation of kickback payments to a shell corporation registered in your name." Mercer pointed at Katie, his finger shaking. "She violated protocol. She performed unauthorized procedures. You can't let her destroy me because she has a uniform." Katie stepped forward. The lobby went dead silent, that particular silence that only happens when everyone stops breathing. She looked at Mercer, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. The deferential nurse was gone. What remained was someone who'd made life-and-death decisions under fire, someone who'd held bleeding soldiers and chosen which ones had time to live. "I saved a man's life," she said, each word a separate sentence. "You tried to end my career to hide theft. We're not the same." The security officers escorted Mercer through the lobby. His hospital badge was confiscated at the main desk. The sound of the ID reader beeping, one sharp digital tone, followed him to the doors. He didn't look back. That evening, Katie drove home through the Savannah rain with her son beside her, the shadow box on the back seat. She didn't speak. Her son didn't push. The windshield wipers kept time with something that felt like grief and relief knotted together. 6 months later, Katie was reviewing surgical schedules in her new office at Seattle General's expanded trauma center when she glanced through the administrative wing window. In the loading bay below, Mercer loaded boxes into a medical supply van. He wore a Navy company uniform with MedSupply Direct stitched across the back, his name embroidered above the left pocket. He caught her looking down at him. For exactly 2 seconds, their eyes met across the distance. Then he turned away and closed the van doors. The impact of metal on metal echoed up the stairwell. That was the last time Katie saw him. She returned to Master Sergeant David Chen's recovery suite as afternoon light angled through the windows like golden surgical lasers. His wife sat beside his bed, his mother in the corner chair, his brother standing watch in that way Marines never stop doing. On the bedside table, the folded flag from Katie's locker rested beside a handwritten note on hospital stationery. Katie picked it up. Chen's handwriting was careful, each letter deliberate. "Thank you for saying yes, Captain. When 7 doctors said no, you said yes. I'm alive because you chose to be brave." Katie sat on the edge of his bed. Her hands, which had held bleeding soldiers and performed emergency decompression in hallways, were steady. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady too. "I know what it's like when no one comes," she said. "I know what it feels like to be left behind. And I promised myself I'd never be the person who walks away." Chen reached over and squeezed her shoulder. His brother nodded, that nod that soldiers give each other, the one that means respect and recognition and the weight of shared understanding. The general appeared in the doorway holding discharge papers and a new assignment folder. "The Pentagon wants you back, Captain. Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. Full surgical command. 3-year rotation with your choice of return placement." Katie looked at the folder. Then at Chen. Then at her son standing in the hallway, his arms crossed, his face showing the same calm composure she'd taught him. "I need to think about it, sir," she said. The general nodded. "You've earned that right, Captain. Take your time." That evening, Katie stood in the hospital parking lot with her son as the Seattle skyline darkened against rain-heavy clouds. The city lights reflected off the wet asphalt like 1,000 small fires. "What will you tell them?" her son asked. Katie opened her car door and placed the shadow box gently on the passenger seat. She touched the glass one time. The metals caught the parking lot lights, solid and real and irrefutable. "That power is not a title," she said. "Power is the ability to help. The willingness to say yes when everyone else says no. That's where real power lives." She closed the door and they drove home through the rain, the folded flag in her jacket pocket, no longer a weight but a promise. Behind them, Seattle General's windows glowed against the darkness, full of people making choices that would echo through other people's lives for years to come. If you believe in recognizing the heroes that walk among us, the nurses and doctors and soldiers who choose compassion when the world makes it harder, please subscribe and share this story. Tell us in the comments, would you have said yes when 7 doctors said no? What would you have done differently? And if you love stories about the quiet warriors who change everything in the moments no one's watching, like and follow for more. Thank you for listening.